Mark has been one of the best analysts in the business for a long, long time now. We go quite a ways back. He's very busy, so it's always a thrill to have Mark join us. How are you, my friend?
Good to see you, Drew.
Likewise. Well, let's jump in. Lots to talk about. Give us your sort of state of your sector, and maybe that's just real quick. Tell us your coverage area and your sector, and just give us a quick overview of your kind of day in the life, and then we'll jump in.
So you're talking about a resetting of consumer expectations over the last 12 to 18 months. And I think a couple of sectors have really seen that resetting of expectations. One of them is the sector I look at, which is the internet sector, whether that's online advertising, online retail, online media subscriptions, online food delivery, ride sharing, et cetera. Maybe not ride sharing, maybe not travel. Those expectations were set down over the last 12 to 18 months. But we've clearly seen this, what I call a permanent pull forward of demand. And I'm not sure that really captures what's happened. I refer to kind of the digital end state when 100% of activities will be done online. Okay, that's probably not a good world to be in, but that's the digital end state or something approximating that, asymptotically moving up to 100%. And we forwarded that. We fast forwarded 2 years, 3 years in order to get to that digital end state. That's what we've done in the last 12 months. I certainly see that in terms of the percentage of retail sales that occur online. I think that's clearly been the case in terms of entertainment. That probably accelerated even faster. And there were some categories that just were very early stage, S-curve stage in terms of their adoption. Online food delivery is a great example that because of COVID, shelter in place restrictions just gapped up. Question is, how permanent, sustainable are these trends? I'm not a behavioral theorist or scientist, but my understanding is, you change human behavior for an extended period of time, 2 to 3 months, and that's the next permanent. That's the new normal. And so my guess is that we have seen a permanent pull forward of demand. We have seen a permanent, consumer reset of expectations.
Right. And do you see that pull forward? I think that's a great phrase. It really illustrates what you're talking about. As we move sort of out of the pandemic and into a post-pandemic world, do you see that pull forward sort of at the same rates of acceleration? Will it continue to not just grow, but accelerate at these same growth rates? Or do you think the acceleration rate slows a bit, but we're still seeing a pull forward, say, as we go through summer and then into holiday and retail for this year?
Oh, I don't know, Drew, we're going to get wrapped around on second derivatives and math. I just think that we stepped up the rate of penetration, multiple years in terms of certain categories like online retail. Now, there are also companies within these verticals that proactively or very creatively and aggressively reacted to the COVID crisis, and that created great benefits for them. Amazon's a prime example of that. But there are other things that went on. The COVID crisis happened to also coincide with some really major product innovation on the part of companies like Snapchat. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. We clearly had an acceleration. No, I wouldn't expect it to continue. I just don't think that we'll go from acceleration. I don't think there's any reversion to the mean here. I think we'll get back to growth rates that we had pre-COVID, and they won't be clipped. And there are a few companies that for the near term, it's the exception rather than a rule, that'll actually will see elevated growth rates, but not accelerating, but elevated growth rates than where they were pre-COVID.
Right. Yeah. 16 months is a long time to reset habits and change habits and permanently change habits, to be sure. Well, something that's really top of mind. So why don't we kind of start with, this digital media world? Obviously, Warner Media Discovery is fresh, and again, we'd seen the acceleration of streaming and that taking hold. But give us sort of your view of this the streaming world, even some of the companies that you're covering, and I mean, we really are in the streaming era, like fully now. And what's going to be the growth accelerants for these guys? They can't all be number one or number two. So do we quickly move into an era of consolidation as well? It's just the cycles are so fast, right?
I think you're right. I think we move into an area of consolidation. Maybe the single best, most important data point when it comes to consumer streaming is the number of sub ads that Netflix had last year, the number of new subscribers that they added to their platform, approximately 36 million last year. And a big chunk of change of that was in the first half of last year. So clearly there was a gap up. You would have expected it, but well, if you had known beforehand what was coming, you would have said, well, that's how consumers are going to react. They're going to light up their streaming services at home. And now we're in a place where, we're coming down to 5 major platforms. I mean, I step back. Disney pivoted its entire freaking business model to offer streaming in what was a very aggressive bet. And it turned out a very courageous bet and an accurate, true bet. Consumers are clearly moving towards streaming, on-demand streaming. There's the slow, and it's not so slow anymore, death of linear TV.
Right.
And then you're seeing these other platforms. Google, YouTube has been accelerating their investments in the space. The Discovery Warner Media merger is a sign of this. And then Amazon buying MGM. Whether that's the right move for Amazon, I don't know whether that particular asset was the right asset to acquire. I do know that spending more money on streaming content to get more people to use Prime Video, to get more people to use Prime, that makes complete strategic sense for Amazon. Anyway, we're seeing these 4 or 5 major platforms all spending. And if you want to be a global direct-to-consumer streaming company, table stakes, $10 billion a year at least on content. Those 5 companies can do it. Look for the other ones to fall off.
Yeah, I saw Netflix, I think, announced 17 billion in spending. I think Warner said they'll spend 20 billion. I mean, it's pretty staggering. Lord knows what Apple and everybody else will spend. Do you think Amazon MGM was primarily, about acquiring sort of just content production capabilities? Is that the primary move in terms of developing new content and buying a studio that has all this production sort of expertise, or is there something more there?
I wasn't thinking about it that way. Drew, you may have the right interpretation, or that may be one of the interpretations. I think the way to really look at this is through the prism of Amazon Prime. We've got a new report out very shortly, but this is, we've done survey work on Amazon for over a decade. And what you see is that Prime customers are more loyal. They're more valuable customers to Amazon. During COVID, the number of Prime customers that Amazon had gapped up. When we survey Amazon Prime customers about why they're Prime customers, what are the top reasons? The number one reason by far, 2x more than any other, is free shipping. The number 2 reason, however, is access to Prime Video. It's clearly a customer acquisition and retention tool. Given how important Prime is to Amazon, anything they can do to boost the appeal of Prime wins. And this is one way to do it. It's clearly an important driver of Prime Video. So we build out the content, which may tell you that Amazon didn't feel like you'd do enough of this organically. They never could create their Game of Thrones. I'm not sure anybody can, but they never could create that. They couldn't create their Stranger Things. So let's buy some Bond. I think that's sort of my interpretation, because by buying Bond, you boost Prime.
Yeah, for sure. No, interesting. And, before we get off of streaming, the share of those who are using ad supported, so instead of ad free, ad supported at streaming networks is going up. Right. So, maybe not the worst possible news for advertisers if everyone's off in a streaming world and no one's watching ads. Do you see that trend continuing? And, obviously, I know HBO Max just announced, or whatever that's going to be named, just announced the ad supported, lower priced. How do you see that shaking out between ad supported and no ads in terms of streaming?
Oh, I'm sure, Drew, that there's going to be a robust market for both. There are plenty of people who like free, and it's a very large percentage of people. And getting the exact statistics right, I'm not sure I have done that. I'm assuming it's around a 50-50 market. Maybe it toggles a little bit up or down, but I would assume that's the case. So what are the ways to play ad-supported video streaming? Well, Roku is a great way to play that as a stock. It's one of the companies that we cover. Its YouTube asset is another way to play that. There are other ways to do it too. But yeah, I would safely assume, that 50% of the market is paid, 50% of the market is ad supported, and those markets are probably equal in dollar size at the end of the day.
And let's shift a little bit over to just what I call the digital media advertising complex. And part of it, looking back at the last 16 months, and we had a duopoly going in, we kind of have a duopoly coming out, although Amazon's coming on as a very strong number 3. Any reflections on the last 16 months and whether this fortified the strength of the duopoly developing troika, if you will?
I think it probably did. I think the big step back here is that you've had a super checkmark recovery in online advertising. And I didn't forecast this. I don't know anybody who did. At the beginning of the COVID crisis, we did detailed reports trying to figure out if we were going to have a U-shaped recovery, a V-shaped recovery. And instead, what we had was a checkmark shape that turned into a super checkmark shape, i.e. growth rates for almost all of the major digital media advertising companies accelerated. They were faster exiting 2020 than they were exiting 2019. So then that leads to the big question of why. And I think there are three factors here.
Yeah.
First, in the second half of last year, live sports came back, but live sports TV audiences didn't. So I think that kind of unlocked a little bit more brand advertising spend onto digital channels. Second is, unfortunately, COVID destroyed a lot of small businesses, but then it also led to the formation of record numbers of new businesses. And I think what small, medium-sized new businesses do, whether they're pet grooming services, whether they're orange therapy or purple therapy or whatever they are, local tax accountants, they pay their utilities and then they start marketing, and they start marketing on ubiquitous platforms that have great self-serve tools. Bringing in Google and Facebook, they benefited from that. The third thing is COVID caused this dramatic inflection point up in online retail sales. So if retail sales are going online, the marketing dollars that support said retail sales also went online, and that also benefited Google and Facebook. So there are kind of three ways in which the mega internet advertising platforms benefited from the COVID crisis. But I'm struck by how much growth and headroom for themselves companies like Snap, Pinterest, maybe Twitter, Roku have been able to create. And Snap is particularly impressive given the level of product innovation that company has rolled out. I think when it comes to AR, augmented reality, advertising tools, offering solutions for advertisers, I think they're leading the field now.
Yeah, and I think obviously your analysis in terms of where the new revenue is coming from is obviously spot on. This is what you do. Where's particularly for the newer I guess Snap and these guys, where's the user growth coming from? Is it international? Is it is it a Snap, which you could argue is kind of cores Gen Z? Are they expanding their demographic? I mean, Insta just keeps on growing. Seems like everybody's on it, but where's their user growth coming from, sort of outside of the revenue growth conversation, even though they're tied together?
Yeah, Drew, they are tied together. The user growth, they seem to have a very strong hold, like 90% plus on millennials and younger generations. And they do it through just really great product innovations and building out more content on the Discovery tab. But it's a different use case. I mean, Snap is really the communications tool of millennials or those just slightly younger than that group. That's the key driving function. It's the pictures tell 1,000 words, and I don't got time for 1,000 words. I'm sending you a picture. That generation, and so Snap's there. And Instacart does. I mean, Instagram doesn't offer that. Nobody else does what, and TikTok doesn't, by the way, either. So that communications platform, that visual communications platform, I think they have started to seep up into older demographics. I don't think they've had dramatic success with that. So I think it's been more younger demographics, and then doing it internationally, an area that they were slow to adopt. They made some big strategic errors when they went public. They didn't have their product out fully developed on Android platforms. Somebody didn't tell them that it's an Android world. They assumed it was an Apple world, and that limited their growth outside the US. But they eventually figured out that, solved that problem about 2 years ago, and that helped lead to the inflection in growth you've seen over the last year or two.
Right, and Facebook, very, very interesting. And Insta together. What do you see as the growth catalyst there? I know Facebook is, David Kirkpatrick had a question, and we can maybe try to get to him in just a second, but around marketplaces, and I'd like to have him ask that question. But just for Facebook and Insta, Insta's apparently copying, TikTok and trying to do sort of a younger, type of thing. But maybe the question I'd like to ask here is TikTok's not public, so you don't cover it, but maybe you will if they do go public. But how do you see TikTok's impact on the companies that you do cover from a competitive standpoint, whether it's taking share or dollars? And I'm assuming you just assume they'll go public at some point.
I would assume so. If they want to, I would assume without any opinion that there would be public market interest in that asset, but I don't know. And that's just basic reaction reading, public media. Let's see. So Instagram and Facebook, the question is, they've had those three drivers coming out of COVID, this tipping over of linear TV ad budgets, this acceleration in retail spend online, and so the attendant ad dollars that go with that, and then kind of as a great play off of small, medium-sized businesses, new business formation. I mean, there are 10 million advertisers on Facebook. I mean, that isn't Verizon. Those are your small mom and pop businesses, and they're spending $1,000, $500 a year, and it adds up. anyway, so they got that growth for them, and I think that's good enough to power them for a while. Do they have greenfield revenue opportunities? I think there's at least three that we're super focused on: Facebook Watch, Facebook Marketplace, and WhatsApp. I'm still waiting for WhatsApp monetization, but I'm sorry, they got 1 billion to 2 billion users. That's a necessary application for a large chunk of the global internet population outside the US. I think it's just a matter of how and when, not if, they can monetize WhatsApp. So there are growth drivers there, and those are the three kind of greenfield revenue opportunities to come to mind. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a fourth, which is that I think one of the big so whats that came out of the COVID crisis is the rise of social commerce. So the idea that we would do more shopping on our social media sites, but I don't want to overstate this trend. I think that taps into what may be called targeted impulse purchasing, or TIP, targeted impulse purchasing, and that's always going to be a small percentage, no matter how targeted, how well targeted. That's always going to be a small percentage of total retail spend. I don't go to Facebook or Instagram to shop, and I'm never going to go there to shop. But if they occasionally get me at the right mood, right time, right product, I may buy it. I'll go to Amazon when I'm in shop mode, and that means more of my dollars are always going to go to platforms like that than they will go to social media platforms.
Interesting. Why don't we bring on David Kirkpatrick real quick? I know he has a kind of a quick follow-up related to that.
Yeah, that's exactly a lead into my question. Hey, Mark, great to have you.
Hey, David.
The question I have was related to that last thing. Facebook's got Marketplace. Meanwhile, Amazon's coming up their tailpipe in advertising. I guess my question is there any prospect that Facebook could ever really go much more aggressively into retailing, in the sense that would they ever hold inventory? Would they ever hold inventory for their marketplace sellers? I mean, to what extent do you see Facebook really moving towards that kind of a company, or is that really going to still be a secondary business for them indefinitely?
So, David, I'd be curious in your answer to that question, but I'll start off, and then I'd love to get your opinion. I'm going to simplify this. Where are the odds greater that an advertising platform can integrate into becoming a retail platform, or that a retail platform can integrate into becoming an advertising platform? I'm going with the latter rather than the first. Which is, Amazon's advantage is they have credit card relationships with you and me. So they know a heck of a lot about what we have purchased, what we shop for, what we look for, what we put back in the basket, et cetera. And that marketplace, I mean, they just Googled their results. Now, the problem for Amazon, by the way, is they may have gone a couple of steps too far. They may have lost the quality of the Amazon marketplace. I think it's deteriorated the last couple of years. And I think you've seen it in declining satisfaction scores at Amazon. That's an addressable problem, but they did create that problem. They need to solve that. You go the other way towards Facebook. I mean, Facebook trying to figure out logistics. Okay, if you can do it, great, but you have no competencies with which to start getting into that business. You're going to have to hire that in. I think what they're doing is the smart thing, which is let's stay at the advertising end of the spectrum. Let's stay at the top of the funnel. And let's create more and more qualified lead for merchants. Let's create wonderful inventory that merchants with their partners like Shopify can come in and monetize, and we'll just get a little bit of tax off that. I think that's the smart move. If Facebook were to really try to vertically integrate into holding inventory, I think that would be a huge strategic error, but I may be wrong. David, your thought?
No, I don't have thoughts to contradict or even amplify that. I totally would defer to you on that, and it makes perfect sense. But can I ask one more question, a different but somewhat related question? There is so much pushback against all these platforms. I mean, we just saw the DC Attorney General file suit against Amazon for anti-competitive behavior, and these massive lawsuits against both Google and Facebook from all the attorneys general, and then you have stuff in Europe and etc. I guess I'd love to get your perspective as a longtime kind of sage on this. How much is pushback going to hurt these platforms? Regulatory, governmental pushback, or will it not really hurt them at all? And because ultimately there is something that is felt by so many of us to be fundamentally out of whack with just the sheer scale of these platforms in our lives. And what happens next?
Well, look, David, if your point of view is right, that by so many of us there really is something fundamentally out of whack, then that's going to come back and negatively impact these platforms. And you may well be right. They're clearly extremely powerful platforms. if you're working at the Department of Justice in the Antitrust Division, I don't know what company you'd be looking at other than Facebook, Google, Amazon, and maybe Microsoft or an Apple. I mean, these are massive platforms with the potential to act to act monopolistically in a way that really undermines innovation. I don't know that argument's been made well enough yet, and I actually think that these companies, they're extremely large companies and they're extremely innovative, and they've offered enormous benefits to consumers. Do they play aggressively? Absolutely. It's almost like that's the cold winter, is the fight between these oligopolies almost. So I don't know. But to your basic point, yes, the sentiment, public sentiment on these names has changed 90 degrees in the last 5 years. And that at the very least, what it ensures is that very large scale acquisitions are going to receive enormous scrutiny and probably won't happen unless they're really orthogonal, like Amazon for MGM and Amazon for Whole Foods. I don't think that would be reversed. And then secondly, that there'll probably be fines based on some of the aggressive tactics that these companies have placed. Because if they're running the marketplace and competing in it, it's almost impossible not to avoid conflicts of interest along the way. So that'll be regulated. And then there's these really thorny issues, David, about moderating content. And there's just no way to win that. You're going to be pissing off somebody. So I just don't know how they, even with the best of intentions, and I'm not sure how good the intentions are. I think they're relatively good though. But even with the best of intentions, that's going to be a very tricky thing for these companies to. So there's always going to be some regulatory pressure, especially political pressure on these companies, and that's the way of the future for Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple.
Thanks, Mark. Back to you, Drew.
Thanks. And 25 minutes has zipped right by. So, Mark, it's always great to talk to you. And I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy, and I hope the next time we can do this in person.
I hope so too. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Mark.